My
Mi
name is
nombre
Nubia
es Nubia
Estela
Estela
Rodriguez.
Rodríguez, soy
I am a
bióloga,
biologist working as a master
trabajo como
researcher here
investigador
at
máster
Centro
aquí
de
en el Centro de
Investigación La
Investigación La Libertad.
Libertad.
Mi
My
área de
area of work
trabajo
within the
dentro de la red de
transient network plant
transitorios es ecofisiología
ecophysiology.
vegetal.
The ecosystem of the Alta Llanura is already known as an evolved system, where the intervention made in the ecosystem has a greater impact than if the ecosystem was not so chained in all its functionality. When the boom of the permanent systems, let's call them rubber, palm, and forestry, started in the Alta Llanura, the work team began to ask themselves, could it be that the ecosystem can withstand this? Could it be that we can develop all of this and there is no type of limitation? Knowing that soils have their special characteristics in a very significant way in terms of nutrient availability, then we set ourselves the task of making a different approach, because the general approach is production. And we said we are not going to get involved in a matter that is completely different. And it is like what we are recommending to farmers, and the same practices that the farmer is doing in his knowledge. Whether it is copied or is a product of its history, it is applying then. That is why we include the variables related to ecosystem services. We did a first work that was in agreement, as I always say, not only in agreement with SIAT, sponsored by the Ministry of Agriculture. We did a monitoring in the transept between Porta Lopez and Porta Gaitan. At that time we evaluated 5 productive systems which were palm, rubber, improved pasture and transitory, compared with the native savanna. Let's say that this was like the kindergarten we did in the approach. It was only 1 year's work. But we managed to see that, yes, it is not that all the systems are bad, nor all the systems are good. Some have some positive things, others have some things that are not so positive. Then we reached a point of how we managed to make a design of agricultural landscapes that managed to add the advantages of one or the other. And that is the way we are going. But also as a result of that work in that year we realized that the methodologies were no longer invented. Invented in a way applied to the local condition. I don't know if it is because of cultural issues, or that we always want a formula, tell me what you applied and what I did. It turns out that nature does not work like that, and even less a nature as diverse as the one in our country. Then, for each site, for each ecosystem, we have to have knowledge of how it is working, to be able to make the intervention, and our farmers do not want to do that. But we were the institutional responsibility, and we started to document it, and that is why we are in the work we are in. Let's say that what one has to sow in the farmer is the responsibility he has, not only wanting to get product and money, but the responsibility he has with the only house we all share whether we like it or not, which is this planet. There is no other house. And then of course, farmers are very perceptive, they themselves make their adjustments and say, well, this is very complicated to do, come on, I'll do it here. Let's say that this is a game between coming and going. Because one monitors in the field, one is already sure of the data they are giving me, and no less they are not the product of the global model, but of the model developed locally, so that the answer I am reading is the one that is being given, and as my same practices that I am proposing to the farmer can be improved from research. So it is not that it is dispersed, it is that on the one hand the farmers adjust it, and on the other hand research also has the obligation to feed back and modify the paths they are following, because we do not have the revealed truth, nor do we have the model of nature set in black and white. The models change, and the models only involve certain aspects, which are the ones that call our attention. That is to say, the models, we must have our models, adjust our models. The models must respond to the questions that we have. That is to say, the models are not because they are, but how do I build a model that responds to the question that I am asking? So when we have the habit of using the model, I do not know what I have done in them are answering their questions. When we bring them here, answer our questions. What adjustments we need to ask those models to answer the questions we have at the local level. What I want to share with you is how the ecosystem services provided by the soil are linked to precision agriculture and conservation agriculture as strategies to make productive systems much more sustainable, both in time and space, and from an environmental and economic point of view. It turns out that all the practices that can be managed within the concept of precision agriculture have as a primary objective to make much more efficient use of resources that the farmer is putting into the crop. In other words, if there is a need for fertilization, it should be done just at the moment when the crop needs it. If a herbicide application is made to manage a weed, and that it is done specifically on the site, and as I say at the right time, but that also has an additional component, and that is how these practices are impacting the ecosystem services, which the ecosystem itself is providing. In the case of us here at La Libertad, our main objective is the ecosystem services provided by the soil. Why the soil? Because the soil is, and I am going to call it, the organ that is capable of accumulating the highest concentration of carbon on the planet, and as you have heard, everything that has to do with climate change, with carbon capture, greenhouse gases, the soil is beginning to play a leading role in all that is being done to manage precision agriculture. So if we look at the ecosystem services provided by the soil, what does it provide? We have water, we have biodiversity, we have carbon sequestration, in other words, the biogeochemical cycles that are associated with the soil component. In our case, we are monitoring soil macrofauna, we are monitoring water storage, so that we can make fertilizer applications, or run planting times where water availability is better for critical stages of the crop. And this is how we are in a corn crop, which corresponds to one of the precision agriculture trials, which involves two aspects. It has in nutrition, nitrogen. We are talking about low doses of nitrogen versus high doses of nitrogen, and the water component in the soil, monitored through radar images. So we are monitoring here, in addition to all the productive component, then we are evaluating the macrofauna in the soil, we are evaluating carbon storage. In the soil, we are evaluating greenhouse gases, and if we join carbon storage, and greenhouse gases, then we will have a set of variables that is associated with climate regulation. So one of our concerns within the projects we develop are the methodologies used to make measurements of greenhouse gases. The country addresses the first level to estimate these greenhouse gases, and it is a level that is associated with global studies and global models, and with the we make estimates based on the statistics that are handled at the national level. So the uncertainty we have is very high, because we do not have local data. However, since the third communication, the country, and specifically some unions have started to work on determining the emission factors of their specific practices. So we are talking about the palm growers, we are talking about the rice growers, and they have been working specifically on their production systems. What we are doing is, as I was saying for soil, we are using fixed cameras. But we have realized that the values that were being reported were not necessarily the best. Because let's call it this way, as the protocol not only of taking information in the field, but also the analytical depending on the equipment that was available to make the determinations, we had to adjust it, and that is a phase that we are completing at this moment. What is happening in the ecosystem? That is, if I make the intervention directly in the soil, I am measuring only that component. But if I am measuring in the atmosphere, I am measuring the balance that the same system is making of all those gases, as long as we have the sensors and instrumentation that is available. Specifically at La Libertad, we were the first in the country to set up an eco-variance tower, which is a micro-meteorological technique that, without intervening in the ecosystem, we can determine the changes in concentration at the second level. And in the specific case of the EDIT tower, it is an equipment that manages to take the changes in concentration 20 data per second. That is, it is usually done in 30-minute windows, in order to be able to analyze the information. Thanks to this team, we have already had 2 doctoral theses. The first one on livestock systems, where the first conclusion is that information management has to be developed at a local level. There is no formula that you apply to analyze the information. Why? Because we crashed here with the fact that wind intensity and wind direction depend on the time of the day. So we had to extract the information associated with that wind direction, associated with the position of the animals in the field. We handled the technological recommendation of 3 animals, or 2 large livestock units per hectare. And no differences were found between presence and absence for the CO2 and water vapor sensor. In other words, we are not impacting the ecosystem with the presence of the animals. We do not have the methane sensor, so if we are going to see methane data, we do not have it. The other doctoral thesis was in the highlands, and it was comparing what the change in land use means with transitory systems, that is, the sequence between corn, rice, soybean, even pastures, and the time between crops, with respect to the native savanna. This implied having two teams. The national had a team, we had another one. The sampling systems were not the same. It was necessary to make a homologation work between the two teams, to be able to use them in the same way. We can conclude that the role of the savanna in carbon sequestration is definitely associated to those cycles of drought and humidity that we have in the ecosystem. On the other hand, as the sequence between the productive systems, specifically the space between one and the other, where the soil is, let's call it at rest, is when there is a greater emission of CO2. This calls us to have cover systems that allow us to capture carbon and maintain a so-called neutrality of the productive systems for the conditions of the highlands. In this historical moment that we are living, you will realize that the vast majority of farmers only think about climate change and greenhouse gases. But what I am telling you is that it is not only this. There are other services that nature is offering us, and that we have the responsibility to take care of, so that the same production that I am having at this moment is sustainable. That is why the word sustainability. And that the house really continues to give shelter to the genes of all of us who are the children and grandchildren, and so on and so forth. You will see that within the project we have faced certain difficulties, because sometimes much of the agroecological management can be relatively easy with very small vegetable and aromatic farmers. But when you change the magnitude of the productive system, let's say that the economic pressure, and one aspect that we have also encountered is land tenure, does not make it easy for all these advances to really reach the heart of the farmer, so that he can start to manage them. Let's say that a strategy that can be used and that sometimes is not recommended. And sometimes it is not so easy because let's say that ecosystem services are intangible benefits. They are not, but one can approach them from the point of view of money. So when one talks about money, then precision agriculture comes in. If you make efficient use of resources, if you place them, you will save and you will have less impact. You will reduce all the pressure on products with pesticides and all that, so you are getting closer to innocuousness on that side. But underneath is the value of the other ecosystem services, which are providing the ecosystem in which the crop is grown, and the responsibility you have. There is an issue that also hinders this, and it is the land tenure. One thing is when you are a tenant, you are not necessarily interested in giving the land in better conditions than you received it, but only in taking. And that is a very cultural issue of ours. And on the other hand, when you are the owners, and you think that this is my family's inheritance so I take care of it, then there are two different approaches. And for that reason let's say that precision and conservation agriculture can be completely horizontal, but the management of ecosystem services comes in parallel in a relationship. At this moment, a little more of research to be able to deliver strategies for the future. I believe that nature is doing it the wrong way, so that we become aware, and that is what we are living. Then the countryside at this moment is the one that is providing food for everyone. But we are also confronted with all the market problems. What are we seeing with the cultivation of papa? Decisions that do not correspond to a research entity to other instances, but that really impact the productive systems, but really the sensitivity that there is at this time is greater than what we could have read when we started to do a few years ago. People, nature is taking care to tell you, hey, do it. Because this is not finite. This is not infinite, it is finite. This alert of the capacity that the planet Earth has, it comes from the decade of the 60s, 70s. Imagine if we had pinched ourselves in those times, and society would not be living what we are seeing. But we do not want to listen. We were talking about how to reach the farmer in a concrete way, to stop pouring pesticides, for example, just in case, so every 8 days if I have not done it. Not just in case, no. When the pest appears or when the disease appears, that is when we have to make the application, not before, and in the focus where that is, it is precision. That fertilization is done when the plant can take it, when the soil moisture conditions are what they are. Because if I'm pouring fertilizer when the soil is dry, what am I doing? I'm losing the fertilizer, I'm voting it away. So these are the messages, in addition to another situation that we are experiencing, and that is that given the climatic variability that we are having, we also have to join this census that is being made on a daily basis of the climatic conditions. And in this we need information. I do not know the number of weather stations in the Andean zone, but if we add the one in Seneca and the one in Senecaf, we are covering a lot of the Andean zone and the other half of the country. How many stations do they have?